graphic. Welcome back to another episode of the Transfer Show. I'm Trev Downey, podcasting to you from my field here in beautiful rural Ireland. And of course, I am joined by Mr. Transfer on the channel, Dave Davis. How are you, buddy? Lots happening.
Lots happening. And at times like this, Trev, I'm drawn to the famous words of Moose T, featuring Hot and Juicy from 1998, who said, anointedly, I'm horny, 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 horny. Honestly, everything that's happening, everything that's developing, just a good day, isn't it, really?
It's a great day, and thank you very much for that earworm, which will never now leave me for the next month. So that's tremendous. Look, can I just say to anyone who's listening, especially to those of you who are watching along live, hold. You know that famous scene in Braveheart where Gibbo is saying, hold, and they're charging, hold. Yeah, just wait. We'll get there. We will get there to all the stories you want us to get to. And even when you're talking about it 20 minutes later, we will have talked about it because you came in late. So it'll all be here. We'll start with the big one, Dave, because we'll be shot if we don't. Isak developments. Some interesting stuff coming out here. Obviously, Ornstein has made himself front and center on today's show. He's dropping bombas all over the shop. But the latest development here is quite interesting. And I've heard some really, I found encouraging takes from some rational Liverpool fans, including our own Dave Hendrick, talking about the actual state of his contract and what he can and can't actually do, and what an awful lot of Liverpool and Newcastle fans may not be aware of that and are talking in an emotional way. There are actual facts around here. But let's start off with the latest developments on Isak. What is actually new here?
Yeah, it's funny almost. The weekend and the stories, the headlines that led up to this morning, that Newcastle had 2 games, didn't they? And so I don't know if that was wise, because Eddie Howe had to face 2 lots of press junkets, basically just asking about Isak, wasn't it, and signing, so 2 games in a row. And essentially the big thing that came out from that was Eddie Howe being, no, we can't just automatically stop him or force him to stay. That, that's not how it necessarily works. Quite clear, as he used that phrase, didn't he? I want players that want to play for the shirt. And I think we all knew what that meant. You had VVD after the Community Shield saying, well, Diaz is gone, Núñez is gone, we clearly need attacking reinforcements, and we know what he was alluding to. Of course we knew what he was alluding to. And then, for any really fake Newcastle hopes this morning, it's that Ornstein bomber came out with the deal sheet, didn't it? Alexander Isak, he's adamant he will not play for Newcastle again, even if the window closes without him exiting. I mean, I was talking to some people about this. He said, well, has he had a transfer request in? Well, this is almost more extreme a little bit, isn't it, Trev? He's just saying, publicly, I'm not going to play for these again. Full stop. It's about as dramatic as it gets, really. So a lot of the chips are strongly stacking for Liverpool's side of the table. That looks great, doesn't it? The only thing is still the age-old problem. Newcastle cannot sign attackers. We'll come to Newcastle's. Maybe they've got a shot. Finally, please, for the love of God, get some attackers in and allow us to this to happen. But that has still got to happen. The other thing is there's still the righteousness that goes on with this about, it's wrong what he's doing and all this. This is not a brand new thing in football. As we've said, we've had players that have wanted to leave Anfield and had back injuries or certain other things, practically refused to play. You look at this window. Victor Gyökeres was on strike, wasn't he, at Sporting Lisbon? I didn't really hear Arsenal fans moaning too much then. Johan Visser at Brentford essentially being on strike, only just gone back into training. Again, did I hear Newcastle fans moaning then? I can't remember it that much. I don't know if it's just because it's us and we are massive that the focus seems to be there. But it is another development. It is another bit of flavour to the story. Someone is going to say, and I understand it, it's not an offer, it's not that. But you do kind of get the impression with this now, this is the final bridge having a match lit to it, isn't it, really? There's no chance here. Surely Newcastle, even, as per Eddie Howe's words, they just want to move on and get signings in. Everyone wants this to happen. maybe we might get something this week, but I think Muni have said that for the last 2 or 3 weeks now at the same time. So let's just see.
I even heard, whether it's true or not, from a couple of sources that Jamal Lascelles was saying to the manager, as captain, listen, we can't have this. Yeah. It's not good. And listen, there's, again, like you always say, there'll be some Newcastle people who are trolling our chats and waiting for the thing that they want to respond to. But in the nicest possible way, Liverpool fans have been in this situation before. It's not pleasant when your big star is being linked away and has decided that they don't want to play for you anymore. It's a pretty horrible place to be. But it's also a rite of passage if you ever want to get to where we are now, which is being the destination club. So maybe see that as part of the evolution. I don't know. But what I find very interesting, Dave, and I'd like to get your take on this, is Jan early on Malby on the Spot was saying, look, Liverpool fans aren't going to give a shit, basically. If he walks in through the door, they're not going to care about his behaviour. But he, personally, Mr. Malby, was saying he didn't like this tactic. He was like, just train with your mates, put in a transfer request, do whatever. He found it hard to, he thinks it's a little bit extreme. And it is. There's no two ways about it. And so the question I'm asking you here is, have you heard anything like I have, which is that basically the one driving all of this is his agent?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the two bits that go into it. And his agent is, he's shopping this to all and sundry. It's not hidden at all. His agent in Isak's camp are very clear to say, listen, we spoke to Newcastle twice last season and told them it was our last season at the club. Earlier on in the season and right at the end of the summer, we made it clear. So there was absolutely no doubt whatsoever of what our intentions were, which, fair play, feeds into the mix and defeats that narrative that it's just been sprung upon them or Liverpool have been influenced, in the background, which, all right, that's probably happened a bit. But, they're quite adamant that they've done it that way properly. What I do get, and I do have some stance with this, I would rather, if it was, for any player, it's better just to train, isn't it? Get your head down, put your transfer request in, all right, you're not going to be happy about the place. But to go on strike a little bit, some people won't like. I do understand, though, at the same time, there is Liverpool fans that will say, but at least he's going to do anything to get to us, isn't he? This is a player that's prepared to go on strike, almost completely ignore playing for Newcastle, who are still a decent club. So we want him that way. And I suppose I can understand embers of that, but a bit like Jan, maybe it's just a bit of an old school approach. It was always still play, still trade, get your head down. And maybe, if eventually, which you expect, he does arrive with us, Trev, maybe he'd be a bit fitter or ready to go quicker as well at the same time. But it is what it is a little bit.
Yeah, and the nature of it now, again, just to get one last take from me on this, do you, even with the encouraging news today in terms of it actually happening, do you envisage it happening before the game with Newcastle? Because most people have made up their mind that it won't. Now, I don't think this is following any logic that people can actually work out themselves. So the logic that they're applying to this as to why it wouldn't happen before the Newcastle game, I don't think counts here. But I understand why they're saying it. Like you said a few minutes ago, we've been saying something could happen in the next few days. It feels like we've been saying that for a couple of months now. Are we any closer to those things happening in the next few days? And do you think the Newcastle game itself has any bearing on it?
I actually don't think he will be in either squad for the Newcastle game. It really is a toss of the coin that, who will own, I suppose, or have the contract with Alexander Isak by then. I wouldn't put any money on it being us. And the reason I say that is, look at the track record this window. Newcastle are hopeless at signing attacking players, aren't they? Which we keep hearing. They've got to get attackers in for this to get done. I do wonder kind of a little bit like how long that goes on, though. At which point do Liverpool kind of say, if this is going to deadline day, for instance, Trev, you feel something's gone completely wrong, isn't it? Liverpool wouldn't want it to go that late. Newcastle wouldn't want it to go that late. You are kind of finger in the air, and I genuinely do not know the answer to this. But I'd be fascinated in, behind closed doors, what is a date that Liverpool have in mind? Would they let it go to deadline day and just sack it all off type of thing and just say, well, no, he's here for a 5-year contract and all that? That is just messy, though, isn't it? And there's quite a few games before deadline day as well. I proper sound like a politician. I won't put a fiver either way.
I mean, I see where you're coming from with that. And just last thing on that, and you've touched on it there. I know it's probably going to come back later on when we get around the Premier League in general, is Newcastle's business. And, you know, in many ways, again, the logic is not necessarily there, because if the kid is going to refuse to play and be in breach of contract, then that could get very ugly regardless of whether they get people in or not. We seem to be telling ourselves that we need them to get their act together and be a coherent outfit and actually have the pulling power to get anyone in the door at all. It's getting immensely frustrating that our hopes to get Alexander Isak are tethered to what appears to be a hopelessly poor Newcastle capacity to attract targets. It's incredibly frustrating. And the fact that in most people's minds, and the story that's being put out there, is that they are linked. I think the question is, at what stage do Newcastle say, well, look, this lad is going to be toxic. He doesn't want to play for us, regardless of the fact that we've got no business done because we can't attract anyone. Again, you know my take on that. It just has to get done. So it does seem like it could drag to the very last minute for that reason.
Yeah, and there's the other complication in the mix, which no one's fully sure about. Even the Geordie Patch journalists reporting on it, the PIF, and their reported stance over like, no, we've got our pride. This will not happen. You know, when what Eddie Howe wants to happen, what Eddie Howe's nephew wants to happen, what the PIF wants to happen, it might not all line up. But you're right. I think there's a point now, it almost feels, from today and this. I mean, we've seen this before. Probably seen the video, Newcastle fans setting fire to the Isak shirts. It does feel like Newcastle fans have now completely washed their hands of it. And actually, you know, you feel the sway in there in that fan base to say, just get him out, just get rid, get the money, move on, that type of thing. But good business in football always says, have one lined up before, you know, you let the one out and all those types of things. It's just so difficult to call. It really is. And also, as we're saying this, it's logical, and it's the right word to use, Trev. There ain't nothing logical about Newcastle's transfer business this summer, so you just can't nail anything up.
No, you can't. Obviously, there is a plan B for Liverpool, because if there's one thing that is logical and methodical, there will be a plan B. And I think what most people do get at this stage is that plan B is radically different from plan A, because there are no Isak alternatives. And it looks like plan B is going to be a different type of thing. We're going to get there next, but just up on our list here for our next story is the next most likely bit of business to get done around Liverpool is Kostas Tsimikas, who was absent from the Community Shield squad. And Paul Joyce has been saying bits and bobs about links to Forest, as you had on this show several weeks ago. Yeah. And it seems like that might be a good move for Tsimikas, especially if he's going to get game time. How likely does this one look, do you think, at this stage?
Yeah, I think it'd be almost astonishing if Tsimikas is at the club at the end of this window. We were never, like we said, we were never going to carry 3 left-backs. And it's quite clear, Arne Slot's made it clear that from the squad for the Community Shield, you are third-choice left-back. And Kirk has got quite, you know, as we want, big money, brilliant injury record, all the potential in the world. You've got Andy Robbo, it seems. Now the Atletico Madrid moves drifted. Happy to stay, you know, be that key leadership position, if you want to call it that, in the squad. Tsimikas is unfortunately the odd man out. And there have been inquiries, quite a number, throughout the summer, as we said before. It's just always been that Tsimikas has said, I'd rather play like 20 games for Liverpool than 40 games for another team. You know, in mid-10, that's not what I'm after. He actually used the phrase because it feels like Broadway at Liverpool, which I loved as well. I just think, though, Broadway might have lost its sparkle a little bit, because it sounds great, but if you're only playing 5-6 times a year, maybe Carabao Cup, that type of thing at best, for whatever anyone thinks, Kostas Tsimikas is far, far better than that. And it's telling that Forest, who are in the Europa, have made the inquiry. Leeds look like they're not going to follow it up. That was the latest info we got, that they had made inquiry, but doesn't seem to be progressing any further with them. But Monaco abroad, there's other European clubs. So, yeah, I genuinely, the one thing that intrigues me, and I don't know the answer to this, is what fee would we get for Tsimikas? You'd probably expect it to be almost what we paid for him, somewhere around the 12, 15 million mark, maybe, because of his pedigree, his experience. But it's a shame, a popular character, one of Mo Salah's very good friends, as we know, but smart money says Kostas is gone by the end of the window.
Yeah, I just spent a little bit of time talking to Jan about the turnover, because it's not just that we have new boys in joining an expanding squad. We've also got an incredible amount of people out the door, and the turnover is absolutely stunning. You and I talked about this as one of our early shows. We're way back at the start of the summer. I think it was even before the season had sort of finished. We were doing a cheeky transfer pod early on. And you and I talked about how we both had a gut feeling that there might be a huge amount of turnover. I don't think either of us in our wildest dreams would have thought it'd be this extreme, but here we are. This is where we're at. The next big story that people are getting very excited about, both in the comments, everywhere online, and with good reason, because Ornstein's added again, centre-half situation. You and I both talked about the young centre-halves that were being lined up. We know we were kind of profiling a good, young, incredibly promising centre-half. The year before last, it was Yarrow. This summer, it was Huysen. And now we seem to have pivoted to Leoni at Parma, who, again, I think had something in the teens of first-team appearances in Serie A. So let's remember that. And also the Mark Way thing just would not go away. That lovely photograph that I think you mentioned on Newsround at one stage of Arne shaking hands with him. People thinking that Virgil was doing like Bobby Firmino eyes. We all know where this is going. But it looks like the interest in Leoni and Guehi has been firmed up. This is exciting for a number of reasons, because we've got one plug-and-play centre-back, Premier League proven, excellent footballer, good to go, first-team squad. And we've got another guy who could be a fantastic footballer and may well have the sort of Rio and Gamoa ability to just go into the first team and be impressive straight away. This is really exciting if these two deals could get done. And the news you have is good around this.
Yeah, it's been probably the highlight for many, even with the Isak story of today, hasn't it? The Mark Guehi, and you're right, it kind of led to the Community Shield, and, he's a successful captain for Palace. He lifts that. We've got the Virgil side-eye mix going on. We had Steve Parish saying afterwards, didn't he? He was quite honest that, we can't afford to let him go down for free. It's either a renewal or we've got to sell him type of thing, which is interesting to say, because a lot of the reports coming out on the Palace side are Glasner is dead set against that. Glasner, because of the way it's worked this season and the lack of signings in, would rather even they let Guehi go on a free. But he's not in charge at Palace, isn't he, of those types of decisions? So Steve Parish has made the call. And as Ornstein's tweeted there, Liverpool are in talks, for opening talks, and suggestions are a fee somewhere around the £35 million mark, which, if that's true, Trev, whether it's a straight 35, 30 plus 5, all the things discussed, you are talking about getting a player who had a bid of 70 million quid rejected for Palace in Jan for 35 million. An England international, homegrown, all those. That is brilliant business. And it's also business for the now. Someone, as you would say, plug and play, can go straight in the team. Probably at a level in a way below Canate, but probably a better footballer, if not a defender, if that makes sense as well. In that sense. So that is absolutely brilliant for us. But it isn't just, as you said, that Fabrizio has been kind of alluded to this consistently, hasn't he, about Leoni and Liverpool being keen. He's been building it up for a while. You've got to be honest about that. And as you know, our information is he's got a fantastic source for that. Let's just leave it at that one. But yeah, this one keeps coming up, doesn't he, Leoni? And all the suggestions are now Liverpool have opened those talks around Leoni. They're trying to do both, which I think is absolutely brilliant. I really do. I think it's very much shrewd moves of this window, because it's Guehi for the now. someone who can go in straight away. It also means there's not instant pressure on Leoni just to go straight in, isn't there? He can develop. It feels very much like an FSG signing. And just to plug it a little bit, me and Bart's later tonight, we will be doing a bit of a transfer market metrics around Leoni. His stats, his metrics, all the things that are pointing there. It's also important to say about these two, and not a lot of people may be clued into this. They were picked out of a short list of 3. And I know we've talked about this. The young Greek centre-half, Kouliarakis, I think it's pronounced, at Wolfsburg, they had a real look at him and thinking he could have been one of the 2. The thing to really say is, speaking to an analyst about Kouliarakis as well, Liverpool thought, with a bit of work and coaching from Slot and obviously his team, Kouliarakis could have potentially been a top 5 centre-half in the world. They think his potential, his trajectory is that high. But as many might have seen in the reports, the Paul Joyce article especially, they think Leoni could be special, really special in terms of the trajectory he's got. So it does feel a little bit like an FSG-style move. Guehi for the here and now, Leoni for the future development. And all of a sudden, if you land these 2, and still, touch wood, that's got to happen, but we're talking to agents and both. The only thing I would say is there's a few journalists that put out the line, this is wanted. Liverpool are speaking to Palace first. They've not agreed terms with Mark Guehi because they want to be respectful. Like, nonsense, trust me, they've already agreed terms. It's just getting it done with Palace now. That's what that's all about. Like, ignore that, but not that it really matters. If it's Guehi and Leoni through the door, you're all of a sudden thinking, brilliant. You still want Konate to renew, but it's maybe not quite as big a disaster as it could have been, if that makes sense. You still want it, but you're future-proofed a little bit there. If it was just Leoni, you'd have been like an 18-year-old kid, as you mentioned, from Parma, who finished 16th in Serie A. We're saying that kid could go straight in against, say, Arsenal away, City away. That would be a massive ask, wouldn't it, if one of the major stars was injured? But the fact you're getting 2 in, and I'm saying this just with the info and check-in tonight, Trev, there's even Liverpool considering if they got Leoni, would they loan him back even? There's many things going into the mix a little bit. But with 2 centre-halves and these 2 coming in, I think it will be brilliant business all round.
It has that feel to it, and something that people need to get their heads around as well, because unless you've got information I don't, the Ibu Konate situation rumbles on, and we could find ourselves in a situation in the winter window where if we want to get a few bob for him, we have to do a deal, or else he's just going to go in the summer. So this is where we are with this, and it's why we need 2 in the door who can do a job in the first team in this window. And I'm fully on board to see a couple of comments there in the chat about people being a bit nervous about so many new players gelling. One thing it will be, regardless, is exciting. And I'm all about that, I have to say. So, again, very encouraging signs there in that. I spoke briefly there a few minutes ago about Plan B. Yeah. And how Plan B could be very different. I think somebody misunderstood me there in the chats, and they were talking about Hugo Ekitike. Well, Hugo Ekitike is now a Liverpool player. So we're now still going after Alexander Isak. My point is, I don't think there's another one like him. So our alternative seems to be to get a very talented, more wing-style player. And the Barcola stories are still there. Rodrigo, I've heard now linked with Manchester City, believe it or not. And Fofana just seemed to have been a name that people thought made sense without there ever having been anything concrete. That could be just me. What do we look like around Plan B? And is Plan B actually Bradley Barcola?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because a few journalists are using the same line. As you know, like a story goes round, and we have phrases for Liverpool journalists, don't we? Like market opportunity and that type of thing. The phrase that many are mentioning is all of Liverpool's eggs are in the Isak basket right now. Everything is focused on Alexander Isak. There's many journalists that have said that. But as we mentioned before, and like we said, things don't seem to be progressing exactly as we want. It's going on. Will there be a point Liverpool cut off? Will they look at alternatives? And as many have also said, you want Isak and another probably, don't you? Because especially if Chiesa and everyone else departs, you can look very thin on the ground all of a sudden. But bit of a split, because James Pearce had that line, didn't he? Which I think it was always going to come out. we rate Barcola highly, but not block the pathway of Rio and Gamoa, which I'm not sure I put too much credit in that, but I understand why that line has come out for the club. You had Julian Lawrence at ESPN saying, no, Liverpool did make an inquiry on the other week for Bradley Barcola to see what the situation goes. As you know, when we've talked about this, he is trying to do a new deal, it sounds like it, doesn't it? Barcola and old Jorge Mendes, the old wily fox, it's negotiation point because that doesn't seem to be progressing further. There is the possibility we are being used a little bit in that regard as well to help sanction a new deal. And it's PSG. Like, they can't afford to pay the money. Like, come on, if anyone's in doubt of that at all. But there is that in the mix. As you said, Rodrigo, the deal he wanted was too rich for our blood, and we'll talk about it later, but a lot of suggestions are that a lot of journalists and people expect him to end up at Manchester City now as well at the same time. Fofana, I mean, that was a player that we've been linked with for a while, but again, you come into the mix that I've not really got anything updated on him for a while. We can't lie about it, Trev. We also said the other week when we sold Tyler Morton to Leon, didn't that seem like a great opportunity to have? Maybe they have, that we don't know, but have that discussion or something to develop. It just seems a little bit quiet around other attackers. All the eggs seem to be in the Isak basket. I get it. Most of the people watching, like me, want Isak and another, because we suspect there's going to be departures like Chiesa, Doak and all that. However, doesn't really seem to be a second alternative or an add-on to Isak coming into the mix, I'm afraid.
No, there doesn't. And any pivoting that needs to be done, if it turns out that the Isak thing for some reason collapses, there'll be precious little time left to do that pivot, and therefore you would imagine it just won't happen. I think the likelihood of Chiesa staying around has increased this week as well. Certain things I've been hearing you have as well, haven't you, in terms of talk about conversations that went on with him and the manager?
There was a report, I saw it in Gazzetta Italia, saying that, Liverpool and Arne Slot have spoken to his agent and, Fali Ramandi and all this, saying they want him to stay. I just don't see it, Trev. You never know 100%, but, I mean, he wasn't in the 29-man squad that went to the Far East. He didn't come on Sunday. Quite clear last season. His tune's a banger, but Arne Slot doesn't fancy Federico Chiesa. In fact, it's almost as far to say, if Federico Chiesa is at Anfield next season, it probably means something's gone a little bit wrong in Arne Slot's eyes and he couldn't get people that he wanted to, get him out and all those types of things. We know, as we talked about, his wages and that being a bit of an issue for the Italian clubs, who that's where he wants to go back to. That's who Liverpool have been talking to. But I struggle to see it. And in simple terms, we could be like last season going, oh, he stays. Yeah, but do you remember last season when Elliott didn't play, Endo didn't play, Chiesa didn't, when they were all on their last legs in midfield, especially, they still didn't get on the pitch, did they? It just feels a bit like it could be that.
Now, one of the players you mentioned there will be our last story of the day, so we will have a Liverpool connection. But there is one more Liverpool-related story to go, and that is the forgotten man, the injured Stefan Bajcetic. It's been a difficult one for him because, I think the likelihood is that he probably would have been moved on anyway, but very much complicated by the fact that he was, he's been recuperating for a lot of the summer. Have you heard anything with regard to a deal that he might be doing for a loan or a permanent move, or is anyone going to take a chance on him? Because it seems, doesn't it, like he is very much on the market despite the fact that he's currently injured.
Yeah, that's the noise. Everyone's expecting him to depart, whether it be permanent or on a loan. He's actually got to get himself fit, as you mentioned there. He had that hamstring muscle surgery to get into shape. But again, he was at Las Palmas, wasn't he, last season? And they've got to pick, if it's a loan, they've got to pick it carefully. And I'm going to be honest, all the noises I've heard, that if it is a loan, is to help with his asset value. They don't really see a pathway, for Stefan Bajcetic to get into the team. It would more feel like a loan for a sale. They would accept a permanent sale. But again, you'd be a bit crazy to put 15 million down on the table for Bajcetic. I know people are going to say he's worth that. Have you seen his injury record for the last few years? He's just had hamstring surgery as well. There's no proof yet this isn't being derogatory. There's no proof yet Stefan Bajcetic's body can hold up to a whole season of elite level football, is there? It keeps breaking down. It's young, so there's time, but that is a big question mark. So it would be crazy for anyone to play a big fee, which leans towards a loan, probably later in the window you fancy, maybe very well to a Spanish club. But as sad as it is, and I know he's always had this kind of weird cult fan base, hasn't he? After he had that season where we were terrible in midfield, he kind of showed a bit of promise. That cult fan base hasn't left him, but all the suggestions we've got, Bajcetic doesn't really have a future at Anfield.
Yeah, which is undeniably sad because you like to see progression, and if it doesn't come at our club, I hope it does come elsewhere for him.